The less moral framework is atheism. Atheism has no grounds for objective moral values or duties. And it's interesting that in that last speech, I was disappointed to hear no defense given of that crucial second contention that I offered against Dr. Harris's view. Remember, we talked about the value problem. I gave what I consider a knockdown argument to show that the moral landscape is not identical to the continuum of human flourishing. We talked about objective moral duties, the is versus ought distinction, the ought implies can problem. None of these have been responded to. So if you want a really desperate moral system, try atheism. There's no foundation for objective moral values and duties there. Now, what about theism? Does it do any better? Well, in the last speech, we heard some attacks on my first contention that God provides a sound foundation for morality. Unfortunately, it seems to be that most of these were red herrings. A red herring is a smelly old fish that's dragged across the path of the bloodhounds to distract them from their true quarry, so they get distracted and go off following the dead fish. And I'm not going to be distracted by the red herrings that were offered in that last speech. For example, in response to my claim that if God exists, then objective moral values exist, we heard that I haven't truly offered an alternative to his view, because the goal on theism is to avoid hell. Honestly, it just simply shows how poorly Sam Harris understands Christianity. You don't believe in God to avoid going to hell. Belief in God isn't some kind of fire insurance. You believe in God because God, as the supreme good, is the appropriate object of adoration and love. He is goodness itself, to be desired for its own sake. And so the fulfillment of human existence is to be found in relation to God. It is because of who God is and his moral worth that he is worthy of worship. It has nothing to do with avoiding hell or promoting your own well-being. He then responds, but there's no good reason to believe that such a being exists. Look at the problem of evil and the problem of the unevangelized. Both of these, as I explained in my opening speech, are irrelevant in tonight's debate because I'm not arguing that God exists. Maybe he's right. Maybe these are insuperable objections to Christianity or to theism. It wouldn't affect either of my contentions that if God exists, then we have a sound foundation for moral values and duties. If then we have no foundation for objective moral values and duties. So these are red herrings. Now, I have written on each of these problems, the problem of evil and the problem of the unevangelized, and you can find much of what I've said at our website, reasonablefaith.org. If you're interested, go ahead and look at that. Or, as Michael Ray suggested, talk to one of your philosophy professors. Michael has written extensively on the problem of evil, and I'm sure he'd love to have a conversation with you about those things. Notice, secondly, I would want to say, evil actually proves that God exists. Because if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. If evil exists, it follows that values and duties do exist, namely some things are evil. So evil actually proves the existence of God, since in the absence of God, good and evil as such would not exist. So you cannot press both the problem of evil and agree with my contention that if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist, because evil actually will be an argument for the existence of God. Notice that Dr. Harris has no moral foundation for saying that Christian beliefs are morally execrable, because he has no foundation for making such a judgment. If atheism is true, what objective foundation is there for affirming that one view is execrable and another is not? There's simply no basis for such judgments. So, if he wants to have a debate on theism, I will happily engage in one with him, but that's not the debate for tonight. He also says it's psychopathic to believe these things. Now, that remark is just as stupid as it is insulting. It is absurd to think that people like Professor Peter Van Inwagen here at the University of Notre Dame is psychopathic, or that a guy like Dr. Tom Flint, who is as gracious a Christian gentleman as I could have ever met, is psychopathic. This is simply below the belt. So it seems to me that we've not been given any refutation of the view that if God does exist, then his essence, his character is determinative for the existence of objective moral values. What about objective moral duties? Here I explained that God's commands must be consistent with his nature. And Dr. Harris continues to press the point, oh, but the Bible supports slavery. Again, I'll refer you to Professor Copan's book, which shows that that is a gross misrepresentation of ancient Israel, which did not, in fact, promote slavery as we understand it in light of the experience in the American South. But again, that's simply not irrelevant because that isn't relevant because I'm not defending the Bible tonight. I'm saying that for a theist, whether Jew, Christian, deist, Hindu, moral duties will be grounded in the divine commands which are based in his nature. He says, but then what about people like the Taliban who say that God has commanded them to do certain atrocities? I would say the very same thing to the Taliban that Dr. Harris says, namely, God did not command you to do those things. That's exactly what Dr. Harris would say. The reason he thinks that is because he doesn't believe that God exists, but I would say that because I think that the Taliban has got the wrong God, that in fact God hasn't commanded them to commit these atrocities, and indeed God will only issue such commands as are consistent with his moral nature and for which he has morally sufficient reasons. So I don't think this first contention is really in much dispute tonight. I think it's obvious that if God exists, then obviously objective moral values exist independently of human opinion. They're grounded in the character of God. And there would be objective moral duties if God exists, because our duties arise in response to the moral imperatives that God issues to us. So the real debate is on that second contention. Can atheism provide a good foundation for objective moral values and duties? And I think we've seen powerful reasons to think that it cannot.